Here's how I achieved this look on this piece of furniture. Step one, I cleaned, I filled the gaps, sanded it, and painted it with chalk paint. I used Artisan's Chalk Finish in the colour Truffle, and I painted 2 coats of that. The second step was to add a stencil. So I used Artisan's Creme Brulee chalk paint, and I used an essential stencil, a rattan stencil, and you can use my code IRestoreStuff at essentialstencil.com and get these stencils there. If you haven't seen any of my stencil tutorials, I have loads on my YouTube channel, so go check them out there. Once I did that, step 3, I sealed it with Artisan's Flat Matte Sealer. So I did this over the entire piece, not just the doors or not just the parts where the stencil is. Step 4 is this part, which I'm going to show you in detail, is to glaze it with Artisan's charcoal black glaze. They come in clear glaze, which you can mix with any colour paint, or antique glaze. So I'm painting using Artisan's French tip brush, which is a nice pointed brush that gets into all of those details, it gets into all of the crevices. So I'm adding the glaze to the entire surface. Now I am going to work in sections, so I'll just be doing this top section first, but as you can see, I'm pushing the glaze into all of those little crevices there and ridges. It also goes into the brush strokes, if you've got any brush strokes, which chalk paints, because they're quite thicker, they lend themselves to the brush strokes. Now you might want to wear a glove because this could get messy, because on this part here, we wipe away the glaze. So I've added the glaze, and then you wipe the excess glaze along the grain of the wood or along the wood boards and along those detailed parts. And when you finish, you'll see that the glaze tends to just sit into the crevices, the cracks. Now this piece is an old, I think it's like a Balinese type piece of wood, and so there were some imperfections in the joins and the wood, and I like that the glaze sits in all of those and kind of highlights that. This next part, I am going to be going over all of this rattan stencil. You can see I didn't, I purposely didn't fill in that stencil to make it really a solid coverage. I just wanted that, you know, rustic kind of vintage look of some parts faded and some parts not. Oh, featuring my husband and the dog walking out to the garage there in the background. So as I said before, we're going into all of those detailed pieces. So here I'm just working on the outsides, and then I'm just going to go over the rest of that stencil with the glaze, just brushing it, making sure every surface is filled. Some of the parts of the stencil were slightly raised where they were painted, and so the glaze even sits in those little highs, you know, heightened points, I think I want to say. I'm adding a little bit of water mist because sometimes it just gets a little sticky or tacky. You do have a lot longer of an open time with glaze as compared to paint or sealers. So you do have a bit of time to work with it, but every now and then if it's just a little bit tacky or it's getting, the cloth is getting dried out, I like to just add just a mist of water, and that helps remove a bit more of the glaze a bit quicker. So I'm just going, notice that down along the direction of the wood in general. Don't forget those little inside bits of the legs. Okay, so pretty happy with the way that's turned out. You can see a bit of a difference now that in that top section you can see the original paint or there, and how the glaze just kind of gives it a little bit of a darker antique look. I've sped this bit up. This is the front where I've removed the drawer and the door, and I'm just working on all of that outside body part. I don't usually paint the insides of my cupboards unless a client asks me to. There I go, removing again all the glaze, and that cloth is getting pretty full of glaze now. But that's all the process is. Add the glaze and then remove it with the cloth. So you can just kind of work it. I think I added a little bit more mist there, featuring my dog Olive. That's our puppy. And here's the door where I added some more glaze. And don't forget the edges of your doors. You can see that I've painted those edges as well. I did go and do the glaze on the edges afterwards, so don't worry, I didn't miss those out. But I've filled that with glaze. Now I'm using that original cloth that was dry, but now you can see it's got so much glaze in it, it's completely almost black with glaze. And so I do have that other cloth down there lying on the table, and that's actually a wet cloth or slightly damp. So I sort of went in between using some of the damp cloth sometimes, and then if I removed too much of the glaze, as you'll see in this part here, oops, maybe I moved it a little bit too much, then I'll add a bit more with that cloth that's got a bit more of the glaze on it. So I'm just kind of working it out as I go. How much do I want left on? How much do I want wiped off? But as I said before, any imperfections in the wood or the paint, the glaze kind of sits in those cracks and crevices and shows them up. So there you go, you just keep working on it until you're happy with the way it looks. If you're in doubt and you're not sure how your glaze is going to turn out, why don't you practice on a piece of wood? Paint it, stencil it if you want to, add the glaze, and then you can see how your finished look might look. After this, I did seal it with a flat matte sealer again to just seal in that glaze, make sure it's durable, and here is the finished look. I love how it turned out with all that antique-y grunge, looking like an old bedside table. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I've got loads more of tutorials, upcycles on my website or my YouTube channel, irestorestuff.com. Thanks for watching.